So I just finished listening to Stephen King's The Stand on Audible, the long version of it, which is just shy of 50 hours. So you're on a road trip with me, and we are going to talk about Stephen King's The Stand. Spoiler alert. This talk is going to be full of spoiler alerts. After finishing Stephen King's The Stand, I thought I wanted to make a book report on it. I wanted to do a video on it for myself. I mean, if you're doing things for anybody else this late in life, you got to learn to do them for yourself. And if somebody else likes them, that's just a bonus. So I'm doing this for myself. But if you like it, then that's a bonus. And if we get a good conversation started about it, that's even a bigger bonus. So I hope to see some comments. I hope to learn something from you, and I hope you learn something from me. So this video is kind of made in an interesting way. It's a road trip. I could sit in a room and talk about this with you, but that's just not who I am, and I don't have the time for it. But I had the time on this road trip, so here we are. So you can look out there at the traffic with me and the beautiful scenery, or you can watch me. I hope one of us is entertaining. Since I just finished it, I guess I'm starting with the end. The end, in the entire book, Stephen King never really talks about third world countries at all. The whole book is pretty much focused in America. And it's focused in a couple of different states, after the plague happens, we're pretty much in Boulder, Colorado, and then from Boulder, Colorado to Las Vegas, because you got the bad guys in Las Vegas and the good guys in Boulder. And that's where the book mostly takes place. But at the end of the book, you got some guy washing up on a beach, laying there on the beach, kind of coming to some sort of a drunken stupor, and seeing these natives, in a third world country, and they're speaking some native language. And the guy looks at him and he starts to figure out who he is, and he tries to talk to them in like 3 or 4 different languages. And then it tells you that the guy, it basically explains it out. The guy's Randall Flagg, but he tells them his name is Russell Faraday, which now I really have to look up because I remember the guy who invented the Faraday cage. His last name is Faraday, of course, but I don't know what his first name was. I don't really remember that. But it's kind of a, Randall Flagg's initials are always RF. And throughout The Stand, there's a couple of places where they refer to Randall Flagg with their initials RF, and they talk to him about being Rich Fremont or a couple of other different names that go with that initials RF. But I'm wondering if that's actual the guy's name, and maybe you can make it in the comments who invented the Faraday cage, because it's one of the through lines in the Stand is about technology. All the technology is wiped out, and when we get technology back, we're going to be right back in the same boat of creating biological weapons, and we're just going to do the whole thing over again. That's one of the through lines in the Stand. And so when Randall Flagg gets washed up on this beach and starts talking to these natives, he says, "I'm going to civilize you," and he's going to start this whole thing over again. So that's basically, if you were to open the Stand up and read the last page, I think that's where you'd be. You'd be right there with Randall Flagg talking to those natives, saying, "I'm going to civilize you." This whole thing's going to start all over again. And it's an amazing thing of bringing that rough beast round at last. And there's another through line with Stephen King's stories, is at least with The Stand, is how much he refers to some poets. And he refers to some poetry in there. You hear Yeats. There's a few questions. There's lots of questions I hope to answer for you in this video. One is should you listen to the long version? And I would say for sure, yes. The Stand is like a lot of books out there. When you finish them, you're actually sad because you're not getting a chance to live with those characters anymore. You're not getting to be involved in those characters' lives anymore. And Stephen King has such a way of putting you right behind the eyes of every character in the story. There's a lot of really good characters in The Stand that you get to become friends with. You know them like you've spent your life with them. Stu Redman, Harold Lauder. I don't know if you get to be friends with him or not, but Lloyd Henry, another guy you probably don't get to be friends with. And just a list of people. Tom Moon, M-O-O-N, that spells Tom. The list of people, Nick, and all of the characters in the story that you get to become great friends with, and you don't want it to end. So you get the long version. You're going to get to hear some more stuff. That's the one I just finished. And since I just finished it, I'm really still thinking about the end. But I'm going to try to talk for a little bit on here. I'm warning you, this talk's going to give you spoilers. It's going to give you a bunch of spoilers. So I'm hoping that you have already read the book multiple times like me. I've already listened to this book and read this book multiple times. I've seen both movies multiple times. So, you know, I'm hoping that you're at that position and that we're both just going to have a discussion from this video, that you're going to watch it and I'm going to learn something from you. You're going to learn a few things from me. And we're going to learn some things about The Stand. So the first question that I want to talk about is through lines. If you listen to Stephen King's On Writing, his book On the Craft is kind of like an autobiography, but mostly it's just his book about writing. He talks about how a story has through lines. And the Stand has lots of through lines. One that I really pick up that seems to be common in all of Stephen King's stories is the part about when you get something, it's never free. There's no free lunches. Lloyd Hendry is one of the most interesting characters in the story, and he's a bad guy. And, you know, first of all, it starts off before the plague happens, before the pandemic, you know, is the word we've called it now, but I don't even know if we knew that word back when The Stand, it definitely wasn't a word that I associated with The Stand. I would have called it the plague, but now we've got this word pandemic because we're post-COVID and all that type of stuff. And, you know, COVID was nothing like The Stand, but there are a few things we can relate to. Maybe there's many things we can relate from COVID to Captain Trips. And that's one of the through lines is when you get something, it's never free. When you get a huge thing in life, it never seems to be free. There's so many characters in so many of Stephen King's stories that have the power to bring people out of a situation and offer them a life-changing event, but that's never free. And Lloyd Hendry, before the plague, he's running around with Poker, the poker guy. I can't even remember his name, but that guy would always, you know, he'd run around with this .357 Magnum, he'd shoot people. I pokerized him. He's running around with that guy. And because of the crimes, you know, I mean, Lloyd is one of those people who blames somebody else and doesn't actually, you know, take responsibility for his own actions. Well, he kind of does a little bit sometimes, but when he meets that lawyer starts, you know, telling him that it's Polk's fault, it's the Poke, whatever that guy's name was, Poke's fault, and he's not really a major character, so that's really why I can't remember him, but it's Poke's fault that you're here and that you're going to jail, that you're going to go to the electric chair. Well, Lloyd goes to jail, and then Captain Trips happens, and everybody dies, and Lloyd's in jail by himself. And that's one of the key points where Stephen King puts you in the eyes of Lloyd Hendry, and you're in that dark jail cell, and you got nothing to eat but rats, and then eventually it gets to the point where Lloyd is eating the guy in the cell next to him, and then who shows up? Randall Flagg, the walking dude. He shows up and says, "Lloyd, I got the key." And he gives Lloyd the key to get out of jail, but it's at a great cost. Lloyd has to sell his soul to Randall Flagg to get out of jail. Lloyd has to spend the rest of his time on Earth with Randall Flagg, which Lloyd Hendry's life seems pretty miserable. I mean, before he was spending with Randall Flagg, he was spending with Polk, and now he's spending it with Randall Flagg. So his life has not been much anyways. It was an armed robbery before, and now he's Randall Flagg's right-hand man. But I think, you know, Randall Flagg gives him a few rewards, but not without great payment. So that's Lloyd Hendry's payment. That's Lloyd Hendry in there, and that's one of the huge through lines. But even when you get something from Mother Abigail, it's not free. You get something from Mother Abigail, yeah, you're selling your soul to God, I guess, or you're selling your soul to the devil in The Stand. When you get something from Mother Abigail, you know, you can sleep at night, but there's going to be work involved in it also. But the people with Mother Abigail, they don't all die in the end. You know, they get, most of them get to experience a good life and kind of go out. You know, Stu Redman, here's a spoiler, he doesn't completely die in the story. He gets to go back and live with Fran and have his baby, and you know, he gets to, the story continues on with him getting to live his life. So that's one of the through lines, is nothing is ever free, especially when you take it from the bad guys. You could compare Lloyd Henry with the same characters in Gwendy's Button Box, and with Richard Bachman's story, you got the guy who gets thinner, the Richard Bachman story, Thinner, which, you know, we all know Richard Bachman is Stephen King, and even now it doesn't seem like Richard Bachman ever comes up anymore. So that's one of the major through lines. Another major through line is that technology, because at the end of The Stand, you got Randall Flagg washing up on a beach, and he's washing up on the beach, and he meets these indigenous people. You know, they don't even, they speak they're a third world country, and it's kind of interesting because the whole Stand, throughout the whole book, it never talks about what's happening in these third world countries, how Captain Trips, you know, what it does to people in third world countries. But at the end of the story, you have Randall Flagg washing up on a beach after he's been blown up when Trash Can Man brought the nuclear weapon and blew them all up at the end. You know, and we all hoped that Randall Flagg was dead, but he's Randall Flagg. He's a demon. He's, you know, a couple of steps away from Lucifer or Satan himself. You have Randall Flagg washing up on a beach, meeting these indigenous people, these third world country. And he washes up and he meets them, and they think he's a god. Well, he kind of is a god. And he says, I'm going to civilize you. And he's going to teach them how to be civilized. And that's where it all starts all over again. The whole thing just comes round at last. This rough beast comes round at last. And that's there's Easter eggs in The Stand. Stephen King refers to a few poems in The Stand. He refers to William Butler Yeats' poem, The Second Coming. What rough beast come round at last, slouching toward Bethlehem to be born. You hear that line, parts of that line in The Stand quite a few times. And another one you hear is T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. You hear parts of that in there, of course, Stephen King. So he's referring to these poets in there, and you can kind of listen for these Easter eggs about him referring to poems. About that, you know, the entire Gunslinger series was written from the poem from Robert Browning, and about the gunslinger setting off in pursuit of the Man in Black, which is Randall Flagg, and Randall Flagg's in The Stand, and Randall Flagg's the same Man in Black in the Gunslinger series, and it's just, in the Man in Black, you can kind of see that guy in a lot of King stories also, and you kind of wonder, is this always Randall Flagg? Is it always the same demon, or one of them like that? We're doing this book review, book talk on The Stand, on a road trip with me, and I just finished it, so I just talked about how the end of the book is basically when, spoiler alert, by the way, when Randall Flagg wakes up on the beach, sees and at first you don't even know it's Randall Flagg. It just talks about some guy waking up on the beach, and he sees these indigenous people, these third world country people, and it's kind of interesting because in the whole book of The Stand, you never heard anything about any third world country. The only country the entire book is based on is America, where the plague is, you know, killing everybody except for, you know, Stu Redman and the main people in the story. But at the end, you have Randall Flagg washing up on a beach, seeing these indigenous people, talking to them and saying, I'm going to civilize you. The whole thing comes wrapping right on back around. And I just finished it, and now what I'm going to do was, while I'm on this road trip, is I'm going to start the story back over again, and I'm going to listen to like 15 minutes of every chapter, and we're just going to give a little talk about every chapter, and we're going to talk about this book in depth, and hope we can get some good conversations going on this video down in the comments about Stephen King's The Stand. So I'm going to take a moment, and I'm going to listen to the beginning, and then I'm going to be talking back to you. I just listened to about the first 11 minutes of the extended version of The Stand. And this doesn't even really start the story yet. It's Stephen King explaining why he wrote this book, and it's great. It's Stephen King. I always like listening to Stephen King talk, even not about a story. I enjoyed the On Writing on the Craft very much, and I will do a video on that book someday. But anyways, this video is on The Stand, so we'll try to stay focused on that as much as my ADHD mind can do that. The beginning of this book starts out with Stephen King telling you that this is not a different book. This is The Stand, just an extended version. And it's kind of funny how he has you standing there in the bookstore, purchasing the book. Maybe you've read into this first paragraph and, thinking that you can, let's go put it back on the shelf because I was expecting something different. And it's nice he's being humble like that. Stephen King's not just out there going, no matter what I write, it's going to be great. And he also talks a little bit about that with the critics, and he comments on how he's been accused of having diarrhea of the word processor. And right here is a person making a video. I'm hoping I'm not having diarrhea of the camera or the YouTube video. But the easy thing with YouTube videos is they're free, and if you don't want to watch it anymore, you can simply shut it off. But you never know if there's going to be something just juicier beyond that next second of view. And here we go into this video. Stephen King starts out talking about that, how this book is not going to be something drastically different. He also talks about how he dedicates it to Tabby, his wife. And then it starts off with some poets making their stand. And that's a through line on this whole book, is like, where do you choose to make your stand in life? There's that great country song says you got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. And it works in this book that if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for Randall Flagg. You're going to become the evil. You're going to fall for the evil stuff. And, if you don't stand for something in life, when life gets tough, the devil's going to come walking up to you, just like he comes walking up to Lloyd Henry in that jail cell. And he's going to say, I got the key. Because right now life is tough, and if you just do this, there's an easy way out. You got no money? Well, just go start selling drugs. It's an easy way out. You got no money? Go rob somebody. Go steal from somebody. It's an easy way out. And that's a through line in The Stand. So that's just a little bit. It just opens up, kind of getting you a little intro into the story. And right now, I'm right about ready to start it off where we're right about starting the story. Just the first few lines of The Stand, those opening lines. And I actually, that's the great thing about some books, you got the opening lines of a lot of books. And I kind of, right now at the moment, even though I just finished this whole story, you got to go back and know what the opening lines of the story was. So I'm going to try and grasp those, but I don't think I'm going to remember them because this story it's just so many great lines. And we're going to find out what those are. All right, so I've just listened to about the first 20 minutes of The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand, the long version. And in the previous, and before I was asking myself and you what the opening line of The Stand is. So I'm listening to this on Audible, so it's a little harder to pick out the first few lines, because in the beginning, Stephen King starts to quote, he quotes the lines from the song Don't Fear the Reaper. He quotes some other poets. He quotes a couple of other songs. And then he opens into the story of The Stand. And I really think that the opening line to The Stand is, "Wake up, Sally, wake up." You got Charlie, the guy from the army base, waking up his wife and just scrambling through in an incredible mad panic to get her and the baby out of the house. And that really brings back the first scene of the movie, because I know what's happening next is you got Stu Redman and his friends, which I don't even remember if anybody from that gas station actually makes it out of the city other than Stu Redman. I think Stu Redman is the only person who survives, who's standing in that gas station. But you got Stu Redman and his friends all standing in that gas station, and then you see that it says it's a 15-year-old Chevy. So it just fascinates me here for a moment. You know, you're putting so much into that story right there, and you think of this guy who's working on this army base who's not even making enough money, or maybe he's just very thrifty, but he's driving a 15-year-old car, and we're back in the 70s. So there's so many things that are going on right now in this story. There's so many things that you could, think about how timeless The Stand is. The fact that this story was written back in the 70s, and I'm still listening to it today, and we're still talking about it now. And going back to earlier when we were talking about how Stephen was talking about you purchasing this book at a bookstore. Well, who buys books at bookstores anymore? I'm listening to it on Audible, an audiobook, and a lot of people are going to buy this book and read it on their Kindle. So there's that. We're talking like 50 years later? Is it really 50 years? Are we all that old? Sorry. Yeah, if this book was written back in the 70s and now it's 2023, we're post-COVID, we're all that, we're still talking about The Stand. Anyways, Steve, you can see where my ADHD brain just goes all over the place. I'm trying to stay focused for you. You got Stu Redman in that gas station, and he's saying, you better shut off the pumps. And I can't remember who the guy he's talking to, but there's that guy who's just going to be so glad because he can't make it anymore with this gas station, and he wants, and he's glad he's got it insured. I remember that he's talking about how glad he is that he has the gas station insured. So here's that guy kind of bumbling up about 5 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour in his 15-year-old Chevy, comes up and just shears the gas tanks right off. And that's actually a little bit after where I was before, where the opening of the story is him waking up his wife saying, wake up Sally, grab the baby, and he's just grabbing all this stuff. He's piling all of her clothes. He comes running back into the bedrooms with her bras just wadded up in his hands. Her bra straps are just twirling in the back like streamers, and he throws it all in a suitcase, and she can see the hem of her best blouse hanging out of the suitcase, and she just knows it's torn. This is what she's worrying about. Her clothes while he's packing up because the fucking end of the world is here. And he's not conveying that to her. She knows he's going AWOL. She knows there's something really wrong, but she has no idea what's really wrong. So he gets his family packed up in that 15-year-old Chevy, and he heads out of town. And then he goes to that gas station, and by the time he gets to that gas station where our hero, the main guy of the story, Stu Redman, is standing, he's dead. This Charlie and his wife, Sally, and the baby are dead. And that's the end of that. The first character that you meet in this story, the first character you meet, the first guy you get to get, well, actually the first lady you get to get behind the eyes of, the first person that Stephen King places you in the head of is Sally, when her husband Charlie is waking her up. And from then on, and that first person dies. That Stephen King gets you in the head of somebody who doesn't last more than about 10 minutes in the first part of the story. And then next you're in the head of Stu Redman, I think, and really you stay in the head of Stu Redman for a very long time in the story. You do switch around. I mean, you're in the head of Lloyd Henry very solidly when he's being, I guess you could say, rescued by Randall Flagg, but you start out in the head of Sally, and then you spend a lot of time in the head of Stu Redman, and you spend some time in the head of Larry Underwood. There's a lot of great characters in the story, and that's how it starts out, is with that guy, with Charlie leaving the army base in just a mad panic, grabbing his wife, and that's where the whole plague starts. That's where Charlie is patient zero. Charlie's patient zero, and it starts right there, and he spreads it out to everybody at the gas station, and it goes from there. So I'm now going to go, because I've got about 60 or 70 miles on my road trip left here, and we're planning on finishing this book. I'm not planning on finishing this video before this road trip is over. So I'm going to now go about 20 chapters in. So we started that with the beginning. We've introduced ourselves to the first characters, which actually just die, Charlie and Sally, and now we've introduced ourselves, the real first character, Stu Redman, which isn't even in the first 20 minutes because he hasn't made it to that gas station yet. I'm venturing out there because I remember the story. But now we're going to jump way ahead, and I'm going to be talking to you about much farther ahead in the story, and we're going to kind of discuss that. well, it's kind of funny. I was going to listen to some more of the book and then talk about it with you as we went on this road trip, but we don't have no signal. If you look out there at the road with me, you can see that we are in a place where we got no phone signal. And I was listening to this on Audible with, and I was streaming it. I didn't have it downloaded on my phone. So we're going to have to do some from memory. So we're going to do some from memory for a little while until I get back to where I have a phone signal. So I'm going to talk about my favorite character. Not my favorite character. I don't know. I don't even know if I can pick a favorite character from this book, because Stu Redman's definitely one of the top. But we're going to talk about one of my favorites. And maybe this guy is one of my favorite character. We're going to talk about Larry Underwood. Larry Underwood's that singer, Baby Can You Dig Your Man? Before the plague happened, before Captain Trips came, you got Larry Underwood, who finally got a one-hit wonder, or finally got a big hit, Baby Can You Dig Your Man? He's just taken about 20 grand. He's bought a brand new car. Remember, this is back in 1970. So, in the 70s, not in 1970s, but probably about, I think if I remember right, it's in the later part of the 70s. So, he just bought a brand new car. Actually, the story, I think, is supposed to happen in the year 2000. But, all right, you guys can put that in the comments. I mean, you can critique me all you want, because there's going to be places I miss. I'm not an expert on The Stand, even though I've read it I've listened to it probably 6 times. I've read it once or twice, watched the movie, so I'm not remembering exactly when the movie takes place. But I think it's in the 90s when the movies are supposed to take place. But when you're watching that movie, the stories, the book's supposed to take place in the 90s, but when you're watching that movie, you're seeing all these cars are from the 80s, you're watching that, you're seeing Larry Underwood, and he's driving his Datsun 300Z. Anyways, he takes his 20 grand, he buys a brand new Datsun 300Z, and he goes and he has some big party. And he has a party where he's got all kinds of drugs, cocaine, heroin, whatever is all happening at the party, lots of alcohol, spends about 12 grand on partying, and then he decides he's got to kick everybody out, and everybody's all saying, "You ain't no nice guy." And Larry Underwood's really worried about being a nice guy. It's kind of fascinating, because at this time, in the 70s, I was born in 76. So I was born was born probably right around the same time this book was being written as when I was growing up. And I wonder if being a nice guy was different back then, because now I'm familiar with being a nice guy as the nice guy doesn't always win, the nice guy doesn't get the girls, the nice guy is the guy who's in the friend zone. But you go back to this story, and Larry Underwood is worried about not being the nice guy, because it's kind of a through line for Larry Underwood that he's getting yelled at, "You're no nice guy," and he's worried about. There's that part later on in The Stand, it's not in the beginning, where he has that woman, Rita, who's riding on the back of the motorcycle with him, and she ends up dying, and he feels horrible for it, as anybody would, but it concentrates on him for a while. That's Larry's thing. And if you compare Larry to Stu, if you compare Larry to Harold Lauder. Harold Lauder's the nice guy. Harold Lauder, if you put him into Day's world, he's the nice guy in the beginning. Well, throughout the whole book, he's the nice guy because he's in the friend zone. Harold is in the friend zone with Franny. And he's the nice guy to Franny. He's always trying to hang around, be with her, but she doesn't want to be with him. And there's a lot of it's because he's chubby and he's got pimples, so he's not a good-looking guy. But the other part of it is he's not really he's not a man. He's a wimp. He's not strong. He can't take care of Franny. And he's also doesn't really understand the way women work. You can see there's parts in there where Stu sees Harold looking at Franny like she's a cookie. And Stu says, "I wonder what he's going to do when he finds out Franny's not a cookie." And Harold is one of those guys who thinks that women can be owned, and he's kind of working, everything he does for Franny is with a unwritten contract. You can see that in him. He's that kind of creep. He's the guy who comes up to a woman and he holds the door open for her, expecting something later. He's the guy who's taking care of this woman, expecting her to like him in the end. They're the only two people on Earth, and she still won't date him. She still won't go out with him. That's kind of how it is, and he's thinking, wow, I'm the only woman, I'm the only guy on Earth with this woman, and now finally my chance. And then they meet Stu Redman later, and then he gets all jealous and worried because now he's not going to be the guy with Franny, and well, he never really had a chance with her anyways, even when he was the only man on Earth. And that's where you see, so that's kind of where I'm going with this. Larry Underwood is afraid of being the nice guy, but Harold Lauder is the nice guy, and he does everything with that unwritten contract. And in the end, well, not in the end of the story, but maybe in the end of Harold Lauder, he finally tries to kill Fanny, and he tries to kill Stu Redman, and he ends up killing Nick. But he tries to kill them, and he kills a few other people with that bomb he places when they're having their meeting in Boulder, Colorado. And that's just kind of like, that's another through line through this story, where Larry is worried about being the nice guy, and you see Harold Lauder as that nice guy. And that's just kind of something I noticed. And you follow Larry Underwood for quite a while. You know, you're there with him when his mother dies. And that's another thing. I think that Stephen King, you can see that part of Stephen King, because if you read The Craft, Stephen King's book on writing, you'll hear him talking about when his mom died. And you can see that throughout his stories, through every story. But you definitely see it right here where Larry Underwood is there with his mom dying. And seeing him go through that. And you also get to go with Franny when her dad dies, and she has to take her dad and grab him up and take him out and bury him. And Harold tries to help, but it's one point where Harold actually has a little bit of sense and lets Franny do it on her own. So Larry Underwood, he gets in his car and he heads out of town, goes and sees his mom, leaves all of his debts unpaid with his drug parties, and then everybody dies, and Larry's left kind of on his own for a bit, and he meets Rita, and he rides that motorcycle, and then Rita ends up dying when he's sleeping next to her in the tent, and then he ends up almost crashing the motorcycle, and he decides just to walk for a while, and then he meets, and for some reason my brain's going to keep on just forgetting names in this story, and I'm not going to keep on trying to pause the camera and rack my brain while I'm driving down this road to remember what people's names are, and it'll probably come to me. But there's the woman who's promised to flag, and I wish I could remember her name right now, because she's another major character in the story. But I can remember lots of things about her. She has the white hair, and she's a teacher, and Larry Underwood meets her, and Larry Underwood, he really likes her. Maybe he even loves her. But, of course, she's saving herself for Flag. And there's some points where she loves Larry Underwood, too. But he meets her, and he meets her with that boy, that feral child, a wild child. His name is Joe. And he almost kills Larry Underwood when he meets her. He runs at him with that knife. I mean, as much as maybe a 10-year-old running wildly at you with a knife could do. But he comes running wildly at Larry with that knife. And so right there, he meets that woman, and he talks about how he still takes full responsibility for the fact that Rita died when she was with him, and it really wasn't his fault. She overdosed, she killed herself, but he takes full responsibility for it because he's worried about not being the nice guy. And Larry Underwood and the girl who's promised to Randall Flagg and Joe, they make their way. They're following Harold Lauder and Franny to Boulder, Colorado. And, in this time, then Franny is going to meet Stu, and Stu is going to meet, and everybody's kind of coming together. They're all being drawn together because of Mother Abigail is sending them dreams, and they're being drawn to Mother Abigail. But in this party, we're kind of now constructing in this group with Larry Underwood and Stu Redman and Franny and Harold Lauder, and the girl who's promised to Randall Flagg and Joe. So now we got 2 people out of this group of all these people I've named that are all going to Mother Abigail. 2 of them are both going to Randall Flagg, and that's Harold Lauder and the other girl who, for some reason I can't remember her name right now, is promised to Randall Flagg. Those 2 will eventually end up going to Randall Flagg. So all of these people are on a journey. They're walking or they're driving cars, but you can't really, they're riding motorcycles or bikes because the roads are so jammed up that you can't drive a car. You gotta, there's so much traffic. So they're all getting together and going to find Mother Abigail. And it's kind of like that Lord of the Rings where everybody's on that quest to Mordor. Going to that, and they're seeing lots of dead bodies, and they're working their way. And Larry Underwood has to walk through that tunnel. They both end up walking through tunnels. Well, not they both. There's 2 people that end up walking through tunnels, and it's Larry Underwood. Okay, you know what? Wait, the other guy doesn't end up walking through a tunnel. This is how my scatterbrain is working. But you got Trash Can Man, who is with that crazy kid in the car, who's almost kills Trash Can Man. It's Trash Can Man's crazy himself, but you got that other guy who's riding around in the car, and they end up coming up to a traffic jam, and the guy tells Trash Can Man to go up there and find something. Trash Can Man ends up walking up to the tunnel, and he won't go into the tunnel because he's too scared. He comes back, and then you got Larry Underwood, who actually does walk through the tunnel. I mean, how scary would that be? That's one of those parts where Stephen King really captures some frightening part of this story, is where he has Larry Underwood walking through that dark tunnel. You can remember that scene in the movie. It's meeting all those dead people. It's one of the scariest parts. And then he ends up meeting up with, I think that's where he meets Rita again, because she must have walked away and then came back, and he almost shoots her. So that's what I'm doing from memory, and I wonder if I have a signal. So now I'm going to try to listen to something and get back to you. I went about 10 hours into the story, about 20 chapters, and just jumped right in to see where it would put us so we could talk about that. And we are looking through the eyes of Franny, who is talking to Jesse, who's the father of the baby. He's the father of the first baby who was born after the plague. And it's talking about how he says he would marry her, talking about how she doesn't want to marry him, she doesn't really love him. And it also talks about, this is in a time when birth control, this story is taking us back because it's taking us back to the time before smartphones. Like I was saying earlier, it's taking us back to when people were reading actual books. We didn't have Kindles and stuff like that. So we have no smartphones. We got the phone attached to the wall. I don't think we've even got those cordless phones with the big antennas on them yet. Maybe the rich people do. So you got, it's fascinating to watch because Stephen King, came from a place like this. Stephen King he was born to a single mother, and his father wasn't in the picture. Again, I'm going to keep on referring to Stephen King's kind of autobiography, The Craft, where Stephen King will tell you about his life, and you can again see it reflected right here when Franny's a single mother, and you got the first baby being born into after the pandemic, into being that of what would have been a single mother, except for by that time Franny has met Stu, and Stu's a much better man than Jesse was. Stu's, really kind of the all-American father figure. He's a good man. Stu Redman is the all-American good man, the guy who really is, maybe a lot of women's dream. And it's kind of cool to see Franny meet that guy, because you can tell that she's getting started out in life. She's not getting that guy. She's being chased by Harold Lauder, and at the same time she's got this other guy, Jesse, who she got pregnant with, and he just wasn't what she wanted either. And that's where the story is right now. It's right there looking through Fran's eyes, and it's in that part. And you've got Jesse, who's the guy who's going to be, who says he's ready to step up and take care of her, And she's like, no, I just don't love you, Jesse. And they're kind of going their separate ways. And he's, if you go back before this, I'm remembering, this is not, when you start out chapter 20, this is actually after this happens. But if you go back a little bit, you can see there's the point where Fran tells Jesse she's pregnant. And Stephen King really lets you capture his reaction and what Fran thinks of his reaction. And it kind of goes right there with that. And, it's not the reaction that Franny wants. And maybe that's one of the reasons why she, isn't falling in love with him and isn't going to marry him. And, you're kind of, this is just, you're really the point of getting to know Franny. And realizing she's not the most popular girl in school. And she's looking for love, but not finding it. And you're just going through her eyes, and that's where you are, right in the middle of the story. And later on, it's gonna be one of the hardest places in the world to be pregnant and a single mom. But then you're also pregnant and single mom, and the world is ending. And Stephen King is putting you right into, he's letting you experience this with Franny. So that's one character in the story, and that's what's happening right here about 10 hours into the story, is you're getting to know Franny. And now we're going to jump another 10 chapters ahead and see where we are then. Well, I'm out of signal again. This is a fascinating way to do a book review. So at this point, we're going to talk about the Trash Can Man, because he's another unforgettable character in The Stand. So since I can't just jump ahead another 20 chapters, or another 10 chapters, and talk to you about it because I have no signal, we're talking about the Trash Can Man for a little while. I don't remember what his name was right now, and it might come back to me later, but you've got a pyromaniac, Trash Can Man, who sets fires to things, and he's just crazy. And this guy is also, he's searching for Randall Flagg, he's going through the whole thing. And from what I can remember, he's that character everybody makes fun of because they're afraid of him, but they also admire him because he's doing the things that they want to do. But they tease him because he sets the church on fire and not a school, and he burns up old ladies' pension check, and he's just running around starting fires. And when you meet him after when you meet him after the pandemic, the guy's got to be in a place where he gets to go start fires everywhere, and you kind of wonder how many of us might be doing that anyways. I mean, if you suddenly found yourself in a freaking, you got a row of cars down there, how much fun would it be to just, I can't even talk about this, but how much fun would it be to, like, you found a traffic jam full of cars, to go up there and stuff a rag in one of them and light it up and watch the action from a distance? It'd be pretty fascinating. And it's a wonder that Trash Can Man doesn't do exactly just that, because he doesn't do that in the story, but he does burn up some huge tanks of oil or gas, and that's where he gets himself burned. So that's, there's probably a little bit of a pyro in a lot of us, because we remember playing with matches when we were kids, and I think that, I could imagine that if I found myself in the end of the world wandering around like that, I might go, I wonder what it'd be like to just light something up like that, I guess. But I wouldn't be crazy about it being there for Flagg. But you got the Trash Can Man, and I've kind of wondered what I would be like at the end of the world like that. You got Larry Underwood is walking through that tunnel, and that'd be the scariest thing when you're with all these dead people around, and you'd have to go a little bit crazy in that time. And that's kind of like the other thing that you don't see. You don't see any characters going crazy in this story, other than like just literally kind of going crazy. You have Trash Can Man, who's already crazy, but Nobody else starts out sane and goes crazy in the story, so I kind of find that fascinating in this book. We're about 20 hours into the story now. We are 32 chapters out, and we are right in that jail cell with Lloyd Henry. And Lloyd Henry is kind of starting to figure out that things are really starting to go bad right now, because he hasn't seen his lawyer in 3 days, and there's only about 5 guards on the floor right now, when normally there's like 30 guards on the floor. And his cellmate has just died. And he's remembering how his cellmate told him that there was the flu going around and they were supposed to get a vaccine, but they're not going to get a vaccine because the cellmate had traded some joints. He traded 6 joints he had 6 joints under his bed, and he traded one with a guard to get all this information. But his cellmate's dead, his cellmate's collecting flies, and Lloyd Henry is in the jail, and there's that guy way off in the distance going, "Mother! Mother!" It's got to be like one of the most terrifying things, because Lloyd Henry is trapped in jail with that guy who's yelling for his mother, and he's going to spend that time, and he's going to be there for a while. And it's just kind of, that's where we are right now. And I just wanted to make the comment right now that I'm coming up on the town of Redmond. And there's this character, Stu Redmond, in this story. So, just weird coincidence. It's probably completely irrelevant to anything, but I thought I'd just throw that out there. So we're with Lloyd Henry, and he's in jail. And they're talking about how he's got that pet rabbit, and he had a pet rabbit when he was a kid, and he promised his father he'd take care of it, and he puts the pet rabbit out in a barn, and for the first few days he takes great care of it, and he gets to be really good friends with it, and then about a week later he totally forgets about this rabbit, and he goes on about his life. He's going to school, he's doing his things, hanging out with his friends, and he's hanging, and then one day, about 3 weeks later, all of a sudden, he remembers that pet rabbit. And when he goes and finds it, the pet rabbit is totally dead, covered with maggots, and one of its paws is like been chewed off. And he's thinking about how that pet rabbit must have been starving to death and started eating itself. And now he's in jail, and everybody's died of the freaking plague, and he is starting to think about eating the cellmate, or not really the cellmate, the guy that's in the cell next to him. And it's just, it's another time when Stephen King has that great talent of putting you right there in the mind, looking through the eyes of a character. And, this is not a guy that you're necessarily going to like a lot. This is Lloyd Henry, a guy with 2 first names, who's a criminal, and he's in jail for armed robbery and murder. And all of us would rather he just died and rotted in there anyways. And he's getting something that's worse than death, though. He is going to meet Randall Flagg pretty soon and have to sell his soul to Randall Flagg to get out of jail, because Randall Flagg's going to say, "I got the key to get him out of jail." And then later on in the story, King's going to talk about that rabbit again. That rabbit's going to come up again. Lloyd Henry's life is just miserable through this entire story. He's a bad guy who has a miserable life through this whole story. And I'm not really sure if there's a bad guy who has a good life in this story. Seems like all the bad guys, everybody's somewhat miserable in this story, but Stu Redmond doesn't have it so bad when he's having a baby, and when Franny's having a baby, it's not necessarily his, but when he's with Franny, he's falling in love, and he's having a pretty good life. But Lloyd Henry, he doesn't fall in love. He doesn't get to do really anything fun with anybody. And that's kind of a fascinating thing to think about right now in the story, is you kind of go with bad people who are in that place as armed robbers, and I don't know if they get to fall in love. Randall Flagg doesn't get to fall in love, but there's other characters, Trash Can. Those people don't experience things, and it's fascinating to see that in the story. Makes you wonder. So we're 50 chapters in, 21 hours in, and Stu Redman and Glenn Bateman are talking about how they got to get their shit together because they know that the bad guy, the man in black, is getting his shit together. So they have already met Mother Abigail. They were walking through the wilderness, and they've met Mother Abigail, and they're starting to establish their little community in Boulder, Colorado. And they've got a CB up and running, and they're talking on the CB, but Mother Abigail won't talk on the CB because she's afraid she's going to get electrocuted. And Mother Abigail is kind of just, she's that person who would rather not have technology. And now that I'm talking a little bit about Mother Abigail, I'm kind of remembering her, because Stephen King actually really gets into her life quite a bit, how when she was a young woman and she was singing in a church choir, or I'm pretty sure she was singing in a church choir, but back then she was a young African American woman. She was a young black woman, and in those days it was still not okay to be a black woman and have any type of fame or power or anything like that. And she's singing at that church choir, and it talks about how her mother said, no, you can't go up there and sing. You can't put yourself out there because they're all going to make fun of you. And how she really performs very well, and everybody really actually likes her. But then there's some other part about, later on where I can't remember if it was a dream or they actually didn't like her. They did make fun of her, and they did put her down for trying to step out and become a black woman with some type of power. And then later on, she's to the point where she is like 92 years. She's 100 years old. There's a part where she's 100 years old, and she's getting congratulated by President Reagan for being like one of the few centenarians in the world, and maybe even the oldest woman in the United States. And she's got that reward. She's got that award who she shows people when they come meet her at Boulder. And then, there's that later part where she's talking about being ashamed of being proud. There's the part where she disappears and leaves everybody alone at Boulder, and probably right at the point where she could become a leader. And I think she does that partially because it takes the opportunity of her being a leader away. And she's so afraid of pride. And that's kind of one of the little bit of the through lines and the things with Mother Abigail, is she's really afraid of having too much pride. And because that's one of the 7 deadly sins. And I wonder if you really went through the story of The Stand, how many times you could bring out one of the 7 deadly sins. But pride is probably one of the most famous. So you got Glenn Bateman and Stu Redman standing there talking about how all the techies are going to go hang out with Randall Flagg because he's going to be one of those people that has his shit together. And the people hanging around with Boulder, Colorado with Mother Abigail, they ain't got their shit together. There's a lot of chaos there. They're not suddenly getting all the trains running on time, getting the power back on, and training people to fly jets and drop nuclear weapons. They're just kind of, relaxing and, finally enjoying time when you don't have to go to work anymore. When you don't have that repetition of life, of getting up, going to work, coming home, going to sleep, and getting up the next morning and doing it all over again. No, now you could just kick back and drink a warm beer with your friends because the refrigerator's not on again, and then you don't have to go to work and run the refrigerator. And there's so much damn beer laying around, but you got to drink it warm. But at least you don't have to go to work. I remember in the story of Storm of the Century, where the bad guy in that movie, and I don't know, that doesn't seem anything like Randall Flagg. I've not read the Storm of the Century, but I've watched the movie. But I remember the bad guy in Storm of the Century, and he reminds me nothing of Randall Flagg, and then I start to think about it, but I wonder how much he is like it. It makes me want to go read that story now. But the bad guy in Storm of the Century, he is looking at one of those guys, and he's saying, hell is repetition. It happens over and over again. And it makes me think sometimes about how life is so much repetition. Where you get up in the morning, you go to work, And you go back home and you go to sleep and you just do it over and over again. And every day it's just repetition, repeat. And then we all just try to get something like where we get out of town and take a little vacation. But then when we get back, you just start the whole pattern all over again. And all of those people who are living out in Boulder, Colorado, they're kicking it back. They're relaxing. And for a moment, like right now, they just get to enjoy it for a little bit. But it's not going to last very long. It's always temporary. And pretty soon it's going to come right up where they're planning, they're getting their community together, they're getting their committee together, and some of them have to go over to be spies on Randall Flagg and those types of things. So I'm kind of getting to the end of my road trip here, and I'm probably going to have to just kind of wrap this whole report up. So let's go ahead and talk about that. They pick 4 people to be spies. They pick Larry Underwood and the old man, the judge, and they don't pick Larry. I'm getting confused because I'm getting confused with the 4 people that go after the spies and the 3 they pick as spies. So it's only 3. It is Tom Collins, M-O-O-N, that spells Tom Collins, the judge, and the lady who might have possibly been a lesbian, but that's not really laid out very clear, I don't think. But maybe it is laid out clear. They send those 3 over, and they're not really supposed to meet with each other, and they're not supposed to know about the other one going over there. And they send Tom over there, and they hypnotize Tom. They hypnotize him, and they tell him, whenever they say, does Tom want to see an elephant? Then Tom has to go over in the corner and stand on his head. Well, that's what he does because that's his hypnotic suggestion. And it talks about how when they walk over there as the spies, and Tom Collin is the only... So Randall Flagg knows about the spies. He just knows about it because he's psychic or something. He's got that evil psychic ability. And he knows about the judge coming over there, and he knows about the girl, the lady, but he doesn't know about Tom Collin. He can't see Tom Collin because Tom Collin, he can't get into his mind because his mind he's mentally retarded. And that's an interesting thing. There's another through line in Stephen King stories, and this is reminding me of Dreamcatcher. And you have the mentally retarded person in Dreamcatcher who's really the hero, and he's smarter than everybody else. And in this story, Tom Collins is sometimes smarter than everybody else because there's that whole part where Tom Collins... Okay, so after all the spies go over there and the 2 of them end up getting killed, the judge and the lady end up getting killed, but Tom Collins makes it back. And then so you have the 4 of them that Mother Abigail sends over there later. You have Stu Redman and Larry Underwood and the old man, I think it's probably Glenn Bateman, and I can't remember who else, and then Kojak the dog. And then while they're going over there, Stu ends up falling and breaking his leg, and Kojak stays with him, and the other 3 go over there, and that's when the nuclear bomb, when Trash Can Man goes and gets the nuclear bomb, and it comes back and blows up everybody, and so those 3 die, but Stu Redman is still trapped in the hole. And again, Stephen King takes you through that. He really puts you in the eyes of Stu Redman being trapped there in that hole when with his broken leg, and having Kojak bring him a rabbit and feed him there in the middle of the night, and then he gets a fever, and he almost dies, but then Tom Collin comes and saves him, and then him and Tom Collin end up driving back to town. So they're walking for a little bit, then him and Tom Collin have to find a car. They have to jumpstart the car by having it roll down a hill and pop in the clutch, and it goes through all of that. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm kind of running out of time here. And then, so Stu Redman and Tom Collin end up getting stuck in this town because they get snowed in. And then, so Stu kind of gets a time to become like really good friends with Tom Collin, and they watch movies together. They end up spending some time in a hotel. And then Stu starts having bad dreams about how the baby is going to be having a breech birth, and there's really scary bad dreams. And Stu's one of the most, gosh, that guy is able to really calm down and not panic. And something you got to admire in Stu, how he doesn't panic. And then so him and Tom Collin, they finally make it back, and Fran has the baby, but the baby has the flu, but then the baby ends up being better. So this is that's my story, and I really want to kind of end up and seeing what kind of discussions get brought up and what you guys see as through lines through the stand, and what else we should talk about with the stand, and if I should do another video on the stand and talk about something else. And I'm going to do some other Stephen King books videos, just so I can kind of remember the story, and, you know, put in the comments right here what Stephen King book you think I should read next and we should talk about. And thanks for watching this video.